I finally finished It by Stephen King. This book was humongous. It took me about a month to finish, but I did it, and I'm so happy to say I did, but I don't know how to feel. If you don't know what it is about, where have you been? It is about a small town in Maine and a group of kids who notice that they are all haunted by these strange hallucinations that all kind of have the same source, and that is a clown who is kind of haunting this town. I don't know where to start with this one or what to say. I feel like it's such a pivotal book in Stephen King's universe and his repertoire that it's hard to critique it. I feel like any critiques I make of this book are just invalid because I think it's objectively known as one of Stephen King's best works. I think my biggest criticism of it is just the length and how he meanders a lot through a lot of character development and characters that are introduced that we don't even really need to know about, that don't really add anything to the story. He spends a lot of time developing some of those characters where you never see them again for the rest of the book, and you're kind of like, what was the point of all that? That being said, his character work in this novel is incredible, and I loved our main crew of characters, the Losers Club. I loved them. I'd be friends with all of them in a heartbeat. So it's hard to praise the character work, but then also critique it because it's too much at times. But I will say with the main cast of characters, the development was incredible. So I'm more of referring to, when I critique his character development in here, I'm more of referring to all of those characters that are outside of the Losers Club that he spends so much time with. People like the bullies that are constantly taunting and teasing the Losers Club. People like some of the adults that are killed in the town that we spend pages and pages on that we never talk about again. So there's just a lot in this book. In terms of the plot itself and the level of scariness, the plot itself is actually a lot more than just a scary clown killing people. It is so complex, and it actually goes more into the origins of Stephen King's macroverse than I ever would have expected. So if you have any curiosity or interest in Stephen King's kind of multiverse that he created, there is no better book to read for it than it, because it is so deep into his lore and goes over the origins of that universe that I can't imagine not reading this book and trying to figure out his multiverse. Like, you have to read it in order to understand the greater Stephen King universe. At least that's what I think. And I haven't read a ton of Stephen King books, so that could absolutely be wrong. There may be other books that describe it in detail, but this book goes so in depth into it and is so bizarre that at some points you're going to be very, very confused. And you kind of just have to go along with it and just enjoy the ride and not think too much about kind of all this craziness that Stephen King's talking about in his universe. And I don't want to spoil anything, so it's so hard to like tell you that his multiverse is confusing without giving you specific things that I think are confusing about it. So I'm going to have a spoiler part of this review if you've read it, or you know you're not going to read it, but you've read other Stephen King books. If you want to see that spoiler part, I'll put a timestamp down below. But basically, this plot is very complex. It goes into a lot of the origins and the mechanics of Stephen King's universe that I was not expecting to get from this book. So don't just go in expecting a scary clown, because you get a lot more than that. In terms of the level of scariness, I actually did not find this book that scary. I think there's so much of it that the scary scenes in it are very few and far between. So you can read a somewhat scary scene, but then go hundreds of pages without reading anything else that's scary for a long time. So this isn't a book to go into expecting to constantly be scared and constantly have these horror visuals. I would say it's much more focused on the children in the book, like the Losers Club, and their relationships with each other and their kind of quest to discover what Pennywise and it is, where it's not just focusing on the scares. And I think the movie, I've seen the first movie, the new one that came out, and it focuses a lot more on the scares and does skip a lot of the development. It skips a lot of the origins and the lore of Stephen King's universe. So the book is very different in that regard, where it's not scene after scene of scary things. So this is a book that I read at night a lot and I wasn't scared. So I would not say that this is very scary, which is shocking. I thought that it would be extremely scary. I thought I would have been scared and would have been kept up at night, and I wasn't at all, which is good news for some of you out there who may prefer your books to not be so scary. The last thing I'm going to talk about that's spoiler-free is the genre of this book, and I know it's classified as horror, but there is quite a lot of fantasy in this book that is unexpected, and I think it has to do with kind of Stephen King's universe that he's setting up here. But I would also say that this has some pretty strong fantasy elements in it. So if you are a fantasy fan, this is actually something that I think you'll enjoy, because it does have a lot of those elements. Like, Pennywise is a fantasy character. Like, that is a fantasy creature, horrific fantasy creature, but it's fantasy nonetheless. So I was surprised by that. It's not something I was expecting out of a Stephen King book, to come out of it and be like, wow, that was really fantasy. So that was a nice surprise, because I am a fantasy fan myself. So if you like fantasy, you may be surprised by it, and I promise it's not as scary as you would expect going in. So before I talk about spoilers, I am going to give kind of a final wrap up, and that would be my rating for this book. I still don't totally know, because while I enjoyed it and I'm so glad I read it, there were so many points where this book dragged because of the length, and I just felt like it could have been so much shorter with so much of the in-betweens cut out, that did kind of reduce my level of enjoyment while reading this. But at the same time, I can appreciate what Stephen King accomplished with this book. I can appreciate what he was trying to do with the characters that you meet in this book and you kind of fall in love with. So that being said, I think I'm going to rate it a 4. Because I love the characters so much in the Losers Club, and because a lot of the action scenes were very fun, like the scary scenes were very fun, but there just wasn't quite enough of them. I was hoping for a little bit more scares. It's not perfect. It's not going to be one of my new favorites, but I'm so happy I read it. I would recommend it to horror fans, to fantasy fans who are curious about Stephen King and his universe. Highly recommend this book. Moving into spoilers, because, and I'm not going to keep holding up the book because it's so heavy. So moving into spoilers, the thing that confused me the most was kind of the very ending, and I'm so upset that Stephen King left so much of his lore and like magic system and universe and origins and all that for the very end, where the rest of the book like didn't contain much of that at all until the very end, and then it was kind of rushed through. So the whole thing with the turtle, I'm assuming that's because when Stephen King's universe was created, it was created with these two kind of opposing forces that existed, and one of those forces was like this good entity that was the turtle, I think, and the other was Pennywise, or it, was kind of this evil force, and they were supposed to balance each other out, this good and evil. And one day the turtle got sick and threw up, and that is what the throw up was, our galaxy. And you can see, if you've like never read it, you're probably like, what is she talking about? And so that galaxy is what contains Earth, and it, the other force, hated the turtle so much, they were kind of destined to be mortal enemies because they're opposing forces. He hated the turtle so much that he wanted to find kind of a planet in this new galaxy that he had created that he can terrorize, and landed on Earth because he saw living creatures on Earth. And so he crash lands on Earth and is frozen for decades and centuries, and finally comes back to life in like the 1700s, I think. Starts terrorizing Derry, Maine, because that's where he crashed. And I just don't know what to say about that because it's so bizarre. And you can't really like think too hard on it. You kind of just have to like go with it. It's just really a weird story and concept, and not what I was expecting from Stephen King at all. And I might be interpreting this completely wrong. So I'm really curious, for those of you who have read it, how did you interpret the turtle and Pennywise and kind of their conflict, and how the turtle was assisting the Losers Club in beating it, and like how could the losers possibly even beat it in the first place if it was like this like celestial god-like entity, like this force in the universe? Like, how can children just like fight that? So I still have so many questions, and this book, while it contains so much, it doesn't contain a whole lot of answers. And I think that's like, I wanted more, which is bizarre because this book is already humongous, and I just wanted more of what the ending was. And the final battle between the kids and it, and then the adults and it, was so confusing to me. I like was trying so hard to picture it in my head, and I had to keep rereading it because I was trying to picture what it was looking like in my head and what was going on with Bill and Pennywise kind of having these like mind battles, like a battle of the wills or something. And I just couldn't totally picture what was going on. I was very confused. So I just like wanted like more of that understanding of like what was happening at the end of the book. And I had such a good understanding of like the town and the characters themselves and like everything else, but like the stuff that I was really interested in, like Pennywise and this turtle thing and like the magic and like how these kids can sense not only each other but Pennywise. Like I wanted more of an explanation of that stuff because that was the stuff that I was really into. And maybe that's because I'm a fantasy fan, where I think a lot of that had so much fantasy elements to it that were so fascinating to me and were so unexpected that I wanted more. And then it kind of ended, and you just had to kind of accept the ending and the outcomes. And you know, I still really enjoyed it. I think it ended really well, but I just wanted more answers. So maybe I'll get them in other Stephen King books. I'm so curious to pick up other Stephen King books now because of all of this stuff that was introduced in it, and to find all those like Easter eggs in each book that kind of connect them all. Like I loved the fact that we met one of the characters from The Shining in it, and that's kind of your first big like, whoa, all of these are connected. And I loved that. And I loved that the character still had The Shining in this book. So you were seeing that ability demonstrated. And my theory is I think that the kids, the reason they were able to battle Pennywise and the reason they were close with each other is because they had the Shining. And maybe that's off base, but that's kind of my theory, is I think that the kids have some degree of the Shining, and that's why they kind of felt this immediate connection to each other and why they were able to kind of have these like battles with Pennywise. So let me know your own theories with that down below. The last thing I'm going to say, spoiler wise, is there's a scene in this book that was cut out of the movie, which is very understandable. It's when they're kids and they defeat Pennywise, or think that they defeated Pennywise, in order to get out of the sewers. Beverly, one of the main girl characters in this book, she suggests something to the other boys, and if you've read this book, you know what I'm talking about. I didn't see the point of that, and I was spoiled, and I knew that was gonna happen in this book, and I was very nervous for it because I didn't know how Stephen King would handle that scene between Beverly and the rest of the boys. Let's just say they do something very suggestive in this book. So I was super uncomfortable with it, but Stephen King did it in like this sweet way where it wasn't disturbing. It was just kind of like uncomfortable. And I think it's because I didn't really know what the point of it was. Like, I think it was just like Beverly suggesting that they do this so that they know the way out again, and they like all come together and like are bonded for life or something. But I didn't understand why that had to happen, and it was never really explained or talked about again after it happened, and like what that even accomplished. So I just thought that was a little odd and just uncomfortable. Like, that was definitely the most uncomfortable part of this book by far, that I just didn't really see a point to. So if you have theories as to like why they did that, actually really curious. And I've been doing quite a lot of like reading and watching more videos from other YouTubers about it in Stephen King's universe to kind of get other people's theories, because it's so fascinating. Like, you can interpret this so many different ways, and that's part of what I love about it, is it's not just very straightforward, and you can interpret this in a lot of different ways, and there's just a lot to unravel here, and I really enjoy that. So I like theorizing about it, but some of the stuff I just didn't completely understand. So I'm curious to see what all of your thoughts are on what I've talked about here in the spoiler section. So definitely leave some comments down below. Just make sure to mark your comment with spoiler if you're gonna spoil anything. Yeah, so that's my review of It by Stephen King. It was kind of all over the place because I just don't know how to talk about this book or how to feel about it. It's just so much to unpackage. I'm just really excited to hear everyone else's thoughts on it. Definitely leave your comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe. I release new videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And until next time, bye!